Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today, we're finally going to be looking at what are the best wireless Pro controllers for the Nintendo Switch. Now if you look at the table in front of me, it's pretty much filled with wireless Nintendo Switch Pro controllers. Now don't worry, we're not going to be going through each and every one of these controllers today. However, if you are interested, I've almost reviewed each and every one of these controllers separately on the channel over the last 3 or 4 years. However, what you need to know for today is that when I'm saying we're looking at the best wireless Pro controllers for the Nintendo Switch, I'm taking into account almost every major model out there. Now in today's video, just like in most things in life, there isn't one perfect answer to every question. And that's why in today's video, we'll be looking at what I would consider the top 6 models of wireless Pro controllers. Because depending on how you use your Switch, what games you play most, or even just the size of your hands, the perfect Pro controller for each person might differ slightly. But what I can definitely say is that after testing over 25 different controllers, not even counting the wired ones, these 6 controllers that I'll be talking about today are definitely, in my opinion, the best choices overall. And I will, by the end of the video, be naming my personal favorite, the one controller I would choose if I could only own one Pro controller. Now as we jump into our first controller, just remember to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already and hit that like button. Now our first controller for today, although it'll feel like an easy choice, is one that I just felt had to be included on today's list, and that is the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Now just before I get into the particulars on exactly why I think this is still a good controller to choose in 2023, no matter which version of the controller that you have, whether it's the Tears of the Kingdom version, whether it's the Splatoon 3 version, in my opinion, they are all equal one to another other than the aesthetics. So first, let's take a look at some of the reasons why this remains a good choice. First of all, the controller offers each and every option that you would expect from the Joy-Cons themselves. Meaning that if you want to make sure that you're experiencing each and every Nintendo functionality as it was intended, well, the Nintendo Switch Pro controller is going to be the way to go. And although most of the functions from this controller have been reproduced in other controllers, there are really 2 that are included in the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller that are hard to find in a full garnished package. And in this case, I'm pointing specifically to the NFC reader, meaning the ability to read amiibos directly from the Pro controller, and also the HD rumble. You'll be getting regular rumble from other controllers out there, however, it'll never be as precise as the exact HD rumble that you get from a Nintendo Pro controller. At least I have not found another third-party controller yet that imitates as perfectly the HD rumble as the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Another really good thing about the Nintendo Switch Pro controller is that it's also an extremely well-built controller. If you're going to be offering a controller to, I would say, younger players, and you want one with a high level of durability, I still think that the official Nintendo Switch Pro controller is going to be among one of the best choices out there. However, one of the other factors that is unique to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and isn't really a Nintendo feature, is that this is one of the only controllers that you can actually mod yourself and that you can easily find mods out there. I mean, if you dig long, hard, and deep, you will find some mods from some third-party controllers, but some controllers just don't have any out there at all. Meaning that if you ever wanted to really personalize your Nintendo Switch Pro controller like I did for my original one here, making it look sort of like an old school NES controller, at least thematically, then you've really got to go with a Nintendo Switch Pro controller. And there are also a ton of other mods available, like LED kits for the buttons, hair trigger mods for your top trigger buttons, and ton of other options out there. So all that being said, you might be wondering, why would you not choose the Nintendo Switch Pro controller? Well, first of all, although there are some unique features to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, some of their unique features have a very low usability rate. For example, amiibo functionality. Although some first-party Nintendo titles do have amiibo compatibility, almost no third-party games use NFC technology. There are a few exceptions out there, but they are really few and far between. Secondly, although HD Rumble is a really nice feature when it's implemented in games, it once again isn't implemented in that many games out there. I mean, a lot of games ignore rumble compatibility altogether, and some other ones, whether you have a standard rumble feature or an HD rumble feature, you hardly feel a difference when it isn't a first-party Nintendo title. And the low usability of these features is most likely why third-party companies aren't going crazy trying to reproduce them. Customizability is a nice feature out there, but not everyone is into modding their controllers. And lastly, price point wise, a lot of people are going to find these controllers very bland, meaning they're not offering a lot of high grade functionality features that people are now looking for in their controllers, such as programmable macro buttons or even multi-macro functions, or even just a lot of deep customization on the responsiveness of the different buttons. Meaning that at a $60 price point for most of the standard Pro controllers and a $70 price point for the special editions, they're asking quite a bit of money without a lot of innovation. But overall, nonetheless, if you really don't know what controller to pick up in 2023, the Pro controller is still what I would consider a safe choice. So now for my second controller for today, let's spice things up a little bit and go with what's probably going to be a controversial choice, but I'm going to be choosing the PDP Little Wireless Controller. And no, that's not just a description of the controller, that is its official name from PDP. Now the choice of this controller is not because of how function-rich it is. To be totally honest, it's probably one of the controllers on today's list with the lesser functions. However, it does offer one extreme advantage. It is one of the most highly portable controllers out there, while remaining extremely versatile to be able to play pretty much any game on the Nintendo Switch. Now, I'm already hearing the critics out there. Why didn't you choose something like the SN30 Pro that has almost as much portability, yet is more feature-rich? Or then again, something like the 8BitDo Lite that basically just can't be beat in the portability factor, all the while remaining functional for pretty much any game out there? Well, we'll be getting into that, and hopefully, ultimately, you'll understand why I chose the PDP Little Wireless Controller. Now, when I actually first picked up this controller, I was not impressed with it. However, the more I played with it, the more it grew on me. Now, just to be clear, as I said earlier, the primary reason I'm suggesting this controller as a top controller on the Nintendo Switch is for someone that needs a high degree of portability, that needs to fit this in a small Nintendo Switch case, or just needs to carry a controller around on a regular basis. It really combines a unique set of design elements that isn't really found in any other controller. Now, its basic body shape does resemble a lot a Super Nintendo controller, although a little bit thicker in this direction and a little bit shorter in this direction. However, unlike most companies that go with a design like this, it keeps the offset joysticks. And that is actually really important for a lot of 3D games on the Nintendo Switch. Because although the symmetrical joysticks are not awful to use for short periods, when you don't have grips like you do on a PS5 controller or the bigger 8BitDo models, unfortunately, it really becomes uncomfortable to use for long periods of time. Having both thumbs towards the center without actual grips to lean on really isn't comfortable, especially if you have larger hands. And at first, I thought that this would be a detriment to the D-pad, where the controller would not be D-pad focused. However, the good news is that due to the fact that it's a little bit thicker at the top, when you hold it in your hand, the D-pad actually falls almost perfectly, meaning that there's a really good balance here in between the joystick and the D-pad itself. Lastly, the positioning of the top triggers on this controller, although not perfect, is definitely the best of all these smaller models that I've tried out. There's enough separation between the R and ZR and the opposite triggers that you really don't make the mistake of pressing the wrong one at any time. And the lip on the ZR and ZL is just large enough that you can hit them repetitively without feeling cramped. Also, as a side note, I do want to also mention that although I said this is an excellent controller primarily for someone who wants portability, I would also say that it is probably one of the top choices for someone who has smaller hands. And the case in point I would make is that my wife and daughter, this is their favorite controller overall. If I give them the choice of any Pro controller I own, this is the controller they want to use. So once again, we've been talking about all the great things about this controller. But why isn't this the perfect controller for the moment? Well, let's talk about some of the downsides as well. Now, first of all, I pointed to it a little bit earlier, but feature-wise, this is definitely not one of the most feature-rich controllers. It's actually lacking quite a few features. To be totally honest, other than being wireless and having every basic button you need to play a Nintendo Switch game, the only extra functionality it has is motion control. So with this one, you're not only not getting HD rumble, you're not getting any rumble whatsoever. And I don't really know if I need to say it, but you also don't have any NFC compatibility. Also, price point wise, I've got to say for the features it's packing, it's a little pricey. The average price I generally see this one in stores is somewhere around $40. However, if you wait for a deep sale, I did manage to pick this one up for around $20. So it is possible, and I do see those sales from time to time, but you've really got to keep an eye out on each and every retailer and swoop in and pick them up as fast as possible when the sale drops. However, there is one last drawback that I do want to mention before we move on to other Pro controllers, is that this controller does have a shorter battery life than most of the other controllers on today's list. Now, this controller offers generally somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of gameplay, which is on the lower side for most of the Pro controllers that we'll be looking at. I mean, it's not an awful battery lifetime, and to be totally honest, if you're buying this as a portable controller, well, your Switch will be running out of battery before this controller will. But if you do end up using it at home as your standard Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and you want to finish Tears of the Kingdom with it, trust me, you're going to be charging this controller at least a dozen times. But nonetheless, as a jack-of-all-trades controller with a high portability factor, this is my favorite choice overall. So while we're talking about controversial choices, here's another one for you. One of my top controllers, in my opinion, is also the wireless horipad. And to be totally honest, it's for the complete opposite reasons as the previous controller. This is a controller that is actually on the larger side. And for someone with larger hands, I do find that this is one of the overall most comfortable controllers. Now, once again, this is another controller that surprised me. Because when I first picked it up and I first started playing with it, I was not impressed once again. I found it was lacking features and the controller felt too light for me. However, as I kept playing with the controller, being a person, in my opinion, with larger hands, well, you know what? It started growing on me yet again, and it just became extremely comfortable to play with. And I did end up enjoying the extra size over, let's say, the standard Nintendo Switch Pro controller, which is quite a bit smaller than this when you put them side to side. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're holding them in hand, you really realize that there's a size difference. Now, other than that, however, there isn't that much to say about this controller. It's just basically very good at everything you would expect from your standard Switch Pro controllers. The buttons are responsive, the controller is comfortable, the D-pad is well positioned, and I do like it quite a bit on this controller. The back triggers also are extremely satisfying to press, and I really like the ergonomics on the ZL and ZR triggers here. And visually, I've got to say yet again, they've got quite a few appealing models. However, as far as I could see, I haven't found any modding kits for this one, so whatever you buy, that's what you're pretty much going to be sticking with. Now, however, on the downside for this one, just as once again the previous PDP controller, we are trading in a lot of functions for that added comfort level. And it's pretty much the same package as we saw in the previous controller. Other than being wireless and offering every button you need to play a standard game, well, the only added functionality here yet again is motion control. So once again, we're losing any kind of rumble functionality here, and we're losing NFC compatibility. And unfortunately, it's not adding any extra features to replace those, like we'll be seeing in a few later models. The price point, once again, is feeling a little bit high, around the $40 mark. However, if you have bigger hands and you do get a little cramped up on the standard Pro controller, this is definitely one that I would say you should nonetheless give a try, especially if you do very long gaming sessions and you want an extra comfort level. And also, once again, as the previous controller, one of its biggest drawbacks is that it also does have a shorter battery life than most other controllers out there. Being just like the previous one, I would say at more around a 6 to 8 hour mark. But really, as I mentioned since the beginning for this controller, It is really the most comfortable controller overall that I've tested out for people with larger hands. So if that is your main concern here, this could be a good controller to be picking up. So now starting on our next controller, we're going to be shifting things up a little bit. We are getting to what I would call the cream of the crop. Now these last three controllers won't only have nearly every function that the Pro controller has, but they're even adding in some extra functionality that it doesn't have. And the first one of these controllers is going to be the Nyxi or Nyxi Chaos controller. And this controller is specifically on the list because it is my favorite budget pickup of all the controllers for today. Now it's not an extremely cheap Pro controller, it still sells for around $40. However, you can get them on sale more around $30. However, all the features and performance you're getting for that $40 really doesn't have a direct comparison in any other controller. It's not my favorite controller overall, but my favorite controller that we'll talk about a little bit later is more expensive. So what are the great features of the Chaos controller? Well, first of all, you've got pretty much every feature that the Pro controller has, minus the NFC compatibility. You've got motion controls, and although it's not HD rumble, you do have a regular rumble functionality. This controller can wake up the Switch just like the Pro controller. And you've got each and every button and general setup exactly along the lines of the Pro controller itself as well. Comfort-wise, the controller is very comfortable with nice texturized grips, and the size is almost identical to the Pro controller. Now, what this controller actually adds to the table is number one, a turbo functionality. And that is an underrated feature on most controllers. And it's not only a functionality that's useful for making retro games easier like Mega Man. It really has also a ton of quality of life use case scenarios in games like Animal Crossing when you've got to gather a huge ton of resources. On the aesthetic side, it's even got some integrated LEDs around the joysticks. There's 3 different modes, 9 different colors. It's a fun thing to play around with, but not a make it or break it feature. However, one of the most useful features and my favorite feature for this controller overall is the programmable macro buttons at the back. And it doesn't only have 2 programmable macro buttons, but rather 4 programmable macro buttons. Now design-wise, I would have liked to see 4 separate paddles rather than 2 paddles that can be pushed in 2 different directions. But nonetheless, currently it is among one of the only controllers to offer this many programmable buttons. So once again, as in previous controllers, at this point you're maybe wondering, why is this not your favorite controller overall? Well, it's still not perfect. Number one, although it does offer those awesome macro buttons, unfortunately, it doesn't really allow you to program in multi-button macros to those different functions. It's primarily really to just be able to reprogram one of the face buttons to those different macro buttons, to give you easier access, especially when you're playing games like FPS games. And secondly, just as in the previous 2 controllers, although this battery is better than the last 2, it still isn't at the same level as the Nintendo Switch Pro controller or the last 2 controllers that we'll be looking at on today's list. I would say that your average playtime with this one will be around 10 hours. If you completely turn off the LEDs, you can sometimes get more a 10 to 12 hour range. But that also will depend if you're playing a game with heavy rumble functions. But overall, if you really did not want to spend more than $40 on a controller, I can't think of a better feature-rich controller than the Chaos controller. Now, our last 2 controllers for today, I have to talk about together. Because these 2 controllers really are, in my opinion, the dynamic duo of Nintendo Switch Pro wireless controllers. And both these controllers are the 8BitDo Ultimate controller and the 8BitDo Pro 2. I will ultimately, at the end of looking at these 2 controllers, be naming my favorite overall. But I've really got to say, I had a heck of a time deciding between these 2 controllers. And if you're as crazy as I am and some other people out there, if you can actually buy both these controllers, I think that you'll have the best setup overall for playing almost any Nintendo Switch game. But now let's dive in and see why, in my opinion, these 2 controllers really are in a class of their own. Now, oddly enough, basic functionality-wise, there's almost no difference between these 2 controllers. You have pretty much, once again, every feature from the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, once again, however, other than NFC compatibility. But just as in the case of our previous controller, what you're finally getting here is additional features that you are not getting in the Pro controller, and really features that can be a lifesaver depending on what type of games you're playing. So just as in previous controllers that we discussed, motion controls, fully compatible with this controller. They work very well. They're almost just as good as the official Pro controller. You've also got rumble on these controllers. Once again, it's not HD rumble, but this rumble is programmable, meaning that you can adjust the level of rumble that you enjoy. It's not quite as good as what you get on the Nintendo Switch Pro controller once again, but it's starting to get there. Now once again, on both these controllers, we have programmable macro buttons at the back. Now it's only 2 buttons, not 4 like the previous controller, but you'll see you can actually do a lot more with these buttons than the previous controller could do. And once again, we do get a turbo functionality on both these controllers. Now it will require a little bit of adjustment when it's in Nintendo Switch mode, but it can really be done in seconds, and the turbo activation button can be easily programmed to one of the macro buttons in the back if you really don't want to lose functionality from any of your face buttons. But what really sets both these controllers apart, even from the previous Chaos controller, is the accompanying software that comes with both of them, offering a huge amount of customizability. Now you will be required to plug it into a PC or a smartphone to be able to use these additional functions, but trust me, it is definitely worth it. First of all, the macro buttons at the back can not only be programmed to replace face buttons, they can actually be programmed for multi-button functions. Now getting them to work timing-wise in some games will take a little bit of playing around with, but if you really like those macro functions and you want to make your life easier in some games, they can really be a lifesaver. But the software does much more than just program your macro buttons. You can customize the dead zone on your joysticks. You can customize the responsiveness of your triggers. And even as I pointed to earlier, you can program individually each rumble motor on your controller to be your preferred degree of functionality. Now this opens up a huge world of possibilities with both these controllers. But this awesome software that's offered with both these controllers, and really the ability to customize your experience, is really what sets them apart from other controllers on the market. At least all other controllers at this price point. Because both these controllers, by the way, are sold somewhere around the $60 price point. Now prices do vary quite a bit depending on sales, depending on if you don't mind buying a color that is less popular. But normally you should be paying somewhere around $60 for either one of these two controllers. So now, what unique feature separates the Pro 2 from the Ultimate? Well, obviously, this controller is much more heavily designed like a PlayStation controller. Now, what this design has in particular is that it's a much more D-pad-centric design. And at least currently on the Nintendo Switch, it is my preferred controller for playing 2D games that allow you to control your character with the D-pad. But there is another surprise functionality that was removed on the Ultimate controller that this one is unique for, and that's the fact that it has a removable battery pack. Now, if you're wondering why this is such a unique and appreciated feature for me, well, it's that you can actually remove this battery pack and put 2 standard AA batteries in the controller. It is way easier to pop in a couple of AA batteries and keep playing wirelessly than to plug in the controller and play with your face right up against the screen. And lastly, the good news with this controller is although it's not my preferred setup for 3D gaming, nonetheless, because of the handles here on the controller, you do still have a very comfortable positioning if you do end up playing 3D games with this controller as well. It's not as big of an issue because of those extra handles than it is with the standard SN30 Pro. So now if we shift over to the Ultimate controller, what makes this one unique from the Pro 2? Well, first of all, it has an asymmetrical design for its joysticks. So if you're the type of person that grew up with this type of controller and prefers it overall, you know what? This controller will just ultimately feel a lot more comfortable in your hand. Also, although the D-pad isn't quite as comfortably placed as in the Pro 2, it still has a decent D-pad overall, so it can still be a very good controller for 2D games if you're using the D-pad. However, as I said, the really ultimate controller in that case is the previous one. However, what I really do think makes this one an awesome controller overall is the few extra bells and whistles that they included with it. Number one, if you want a clean setup on your desk, well, this one comes with a charging stand. And I'm sorry, this is a feature that a lot of other companies should invest in. It just makes it look so much neater in your gaming setup. If you just have a stand, you pop your controller in, and everything is nice, clean, and set up. But this base is also hiding a tiny secret. In a compartment below it, you have an adapter for using the controller with 2.4 GHz. Now this is really an awesome and unique feature, which means that basically if you ever want to use this controller with a system that doesn't have Bluetooth built in, you know what? It takes a couple of seconds to pop this in and you can get up and running. And that, combined with the software that you get with this controller, is an amazing level of versatility. And ultimately, pun intended here, if I had to choose only one controller overall to suggest to you, and you could only buy one controller, and that will be the one controller you'll be playing your Nintendo Switch with, I would go with the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller. I am sad that they did not include a removable battery pack, because in that case, it would have been an easy slam dunk to choose only one of these two controllers. However, do keep in mind, as I said earlier, if you do play a lot of 2D games and almost no 3D games, there can be an argument made for the Pro 2. And also, if you're crazy and you want to buy two controllers, well, like I said earlier, these two controllers really are the dynamic duo for the Nintendo Switch. So there we have it. We went through my top 6 wireless controllers for the Nintendo Switch, going from the safe choice of the Nintendo Switch Pro controller to the best choice overall for portability and if you have small hands in the PDP Little Wireless Controller, to the best choice overall for someone who has bigger hands and wants maximum comfort in the wireless horipad, to what I would call my feature-rich budget option in the Nyxi Chaos Controller, and then ending with what I would call the dynamic duo of controllers for the Nintendo Switch with the 8BitDo Pro 2 and Ultimate Controller. And then finally naming the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller my favorite pick overall. But one important thing to keep in mind overall is that each one of these controllers, in my opinion, really has an awesome use case scenario where they could be your best pick overall. So hopefully this video today was helpful for all of you out there. If either you're buying your first wireless Nintendo Switch Pro controller and you just don't know which one to buy, or maybe you already have a Pro controller and you want to upgrade and you really want to make the right choice, I think you really can't go wrong with any one of the controllers on today's list. So just as usual, don't forget that if you did like the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and click on that notification bell so you know when all my future videos come out. And as usual, I hope I'll see you in my next video.